Hello, everybody. So, for those of you who are going to watch this stream and/or this recording of the stream, I want to apologize to everybody for not uploading any more gaming videos in the last month and a half. Actually, 2 months now. I'm sorry. Why haven't I? Well, I've been working on a game called Punch Hitler, where you punch Hitler. Because it's fun. Who doesn't want to punch Hitler? Bad people, that's who. I have been stuck on and had serious problems with two aspects of the game. One aspect is lootlocker. You can't get the leaderboard to work. I've tried to ask help for it. It works on Windows, but not on Android. I was told why it works on Windows and not on Android, but only after 5 months of struggling. A lot of people I ask for help from their answers were, pardon me, I'm eating while I'm talking. I'm also trying to think of how to put it delicately. Bigger steaming piles of tire fire, dumpster fires in garbage dumps that are on fire than any of my newbie code. God, how do I put this? Give me a second. Let me take the last 2 bites. I guess it's best to start off at the top. When I asked lootlocker people for help, it would take up to a week to get a response from them. They would respond though. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with my code. I asked them if this was correct. And keep in mind, my lootlocker code was literally only one script. It was code written by 2 people who said that they were going to help me get it up and going. Specifically because this type of thing, working with JSON, working with Java, whatever, the whole scripting thing, all of the family of languages together that deal with Java-like scripting and JSON and Newtonsoft and all that shit. I don't have any clue about how to put that together. And I asked him specifically if, I even offered. I said, I'll pay you. I just need to make this work. So I said, well, we'll teach you how to make it work. Both of them. I mean, they weren't collaborating, but they had different work schedules than I did, and this is when I could program every day. So I'd update the code between the 2 of them. One guy ghosted me. Totally ghosted me. And it was frustrating to say the least. That was after he put it together, and I think that's because he realized something was terribly wrong, and he didn't know how to fix it. The other guy, he I don't know how to put it. He was been tutoring me and helping me learn C#, saying, yeah, ask me questions, I'll answer. And then he started saying things that weren't true in any respect. Because I was actually learning his stuff and I was implementing the code that he was showing me in my own way. We were going to sit down and we were going to go through it. And then when I started asking questions, he kept telling me, no, you have to go read the docs first, or you have to learn the fundamentals first, which pissed me off to no end. Because I don't understand this aspect of programming, and I needed to get this thing fixed. I needed to get it working. So I have no idea if he's going to help me again or not, and I'm torn on whether or not I should speak to him again. It was basically a classic maneuver I've noticed in a lot of computer programmers. When they become stumped, they take it out on the person asking the questions. Because then they feel stupid when they're asked a question that they don't have a ready answer for. That's essentially it. And so they lash out. It doesn't help that there's a certain disability that seems to gravitate toward computer programming. And this certain disability amplifies that behavioral trait by a magnitude of about 1,000. And the problem with lootlocker is that it did not have any documentation that was functional in a lot of ways. And the funny thing is, I noticed that all of a sudden documentation started popping up. Like, I'd look for the answer, it wasn't there, I'd ask lootlocker, get an answer a week later, and then all of a sudden the documentation appears. So my questions to lootlocker resulted in a lot of documentation being created. You're welcome, by the way, for my ignorance and desperation to learn how lootlocker works. Because apparently that documentation wouldn't work without me, or wouldn't be there without me asking questions. And as far as looking up for documentation on YouTube, you basically have a choice of these two types of videos. Or three types of videos. Lootlocker guy, who's really awesome, Johannes. He is very awesome. But his video is incredibly basic. And it doesn't help you if you've got a question about doing certain things with the leaderboard that you're supposed to be able to do. The only way to find out those things is not if you look in the documentation, but if you actually go into the code itself. And if you know how to go into the code on that level, you don't need lootlocker. You could make your own leaderboard through your own FTP database. You know, MySQL database, you know, FTP site. So you have that video, and it's one video, and it's 5 minutes. Then you have other videos where people are bumbling through, they don't quite know, and somehow it works for them, but nobody else. Which I'll get to in a minute. And then you have a couple of videos of people who go in depth into, well, you see, as some of them have accents to them, severe accents. This is how you do this, and you just need to make sure you, and then gobbledygook. You know, technobabble. If you're a beginning programmer, and you're going to lootlocker because it's for beginners, and the only videos that you see are advanced technical knowledge, you wind up getting screwed. Which is why I say Johannes he's a pretty awesome guy, because when I went to lootlocker to ask him for help on Discord, they've actually been updating their technical documents. Right, and he's willing to go through and work with me, because apparently I'm not the only person who has problems. So I managed to. Someone else. I mean, I said, "Fuck it, I give up. I'm just never gonna." It was a point where I just didn't want to even try to do anything because I am so sick of certain mentalities of programmers. And I met this one guy who's very, very, very awesome from Australia. Retired guy who actually kind of goes through all the discords, looks for people who ask for help, and he helps them out. And he helps them out by showing them examples of how code works, and that's what you need. You know, if you're a beginner, this is what you need. And this is the difference between a computer programmer who's actually there to help teach you and a computer programmer who is a head up the ass prick. Although there are varying degrees between helping you and how far up their ass they're going to put their head. And that is understanding that when you tell somebody about a concept, that you actually show them the code and how it works and you explain each line of code. Doesn't matter if you've explained it 15 times before. Some people, like me, may need you to explain it again. Because my work schedule is screwed as of now. You know, as of 2.5 months ago. I get to program 2 days a week if I'm lucky. Most of the time it's 1 day a week. I'm not going to remember names of methods 6 days apart from using it. So if I'm having tutor sessions, I need to like walk, and I say, listen, I need to walk through the code. It means that, okay, I'm going to be asking questions for each line of goddamn code that I have a question about. And if the programmer's response is, well, you just don't have the fundamentals, grasp of them, they should have their ass kicked as hard as it can out the goddamn door. And the reason for that is people learn differently, number one. Number two, not everybody has the ability to memorize names and dates, which is essentially the same as memorizing syntax. Number three, programming language is an actual language, like English or whatever. And how many of you out there, especially how many programmers out there, understand advanced syntax in the English language? As an English editor, someone who's technically written reports, literary editor, I've done all this stuff for 20 fucking years. I guarantee you, it's going to take a while. Somebody's getting into it, like me, a newbie, who can't memorize stuff at the get-go. I'm not going to be able to have everything memorized in 1 fucking year. Especially when I've got weeks apart, or days apart, of programming. It's not going to happen. And any programmer out there, and I'm putting this out there to any programmer who might be watching us, who thinks that, oh no, I could beat any English thing you toss at me, I'll break them. And I'll break them because English has as many exceptions as programming syntax, which are things that I've actually discovered that a lot of programmers haven't, including Unity. Pardon me. Back. So, And let me bring this out. Let's say the modulo command. Now that's supposedly an advanced technique, but it's actually a very, very simple function, which I've discovered is incredibly important when handling certain forms of math. And modulo, for those who don't know, let me see if I can bring it up on the website. Well, I can't really bring up a website on it right now. I'm too unprepared. A modulo operator is a percentile command. And the percentile command allows you to, it turns everything into a percentile. Moves the decimal point left. And you can move it left as many places as you want. So you do the percentile, then the number of places you want. And it's always like base 10, right? Because that's number of places if you're operating 10 base. And you move it left, and then you round. You can further use the modulo command to round everything down. And then there's another part of the, when you do that, you're left with the singular number right next to the decimal point, to the left of the decimal point. So in other words, you can take a number, a whole integer. So you've got seven numbers in a row. Any one of those 7 you can take with the modulo command. That modulo command is important in creating a random number generator. It's also important in breaking up numbers to be singular representations. If you create a string and you change it to integer value, so you have a string value turned into an integer value, you could then pick out a number, or maybe you could also pick out a single number in a string. You could do that too, which won't require modulo. But that's a lot of converting back from int to string and back and forth, and modulo seems to be a little bit less intensive on one end, a little more intensive on the other. But it works great when you're using sprites, right? Like if you're creating a scoreboard, a special scoreboard like the one I have, or if you're going to create an advanced calculator. And you can also, like I said, random number generator, advanced calculator, etc., etc., etc. You can use the modulo command. Well, Unity Docs doesn't actually tell you that it's limited, because what you're doing is you're creating a percentile, so you're creating a floating number. Unity Docs leads you to believe that you're dealing with whole integers the entire time. And so if you're an advanced programmer, you know everything about the limitations of 32-bit math, integers, floating points, etc., versus 64, versus long, versus double digits, you'll instantly know. But if you're like some little helper agent, you won't. So the Unity docs aren't updated because these programmers at Unity don't know how to update their documentation. If you're a newbie and you come into it, you don't have the knowledge of advanced programmers. So you already have advanced programmers gatekeeping from the newbie saying, you need to memorize everything. Of course it's not working because you don't know what you're doing. Right? Well, why isn't it working? Go back and learn the basics. People like that need to be drummed out of programming. They shouldn't be hired for anything. They shouldn't be supported for anything. They should be drummed out. They need to be gotten rid of. Because if the documentation isn't really there, And then what you're winding up with is massive gatekeeping by people who are total a-holes. And if you say, well, the documentation is there for floating numbers, you should know that Modulo deals with floating. The documentation for Modulo talks about whole integers. It doesn't talk about turning it to a percentile, which would involve floating. It doesn't actually really say that. It insinuates it by saying you move the decimal point left, and then you can round down. It doesn't actually say the other. So, the limitation for 32-bit is 13 digits. Or not 13 digits, I'm sorry. 2 billion. What's 2 billion? 10 digits. So it's, what, 10 digits. And, so 13 digits is for something I'm doing. So 10 digits is for normal integers when you're using a 32-bit whatever. But when you're using Modulo, it's reduced to 7. The thing is, I also tried to look up a documentation of how many digits you're allowed to have with a floating point after the crap response that I got from some Unity people. And I could not find documentation that actually limited it within Unity's own docs. I found it on Stack Overflow. And Stack Overflow is notorious for answers that are out of date. So I didn't know. That was only after I was told about this. And I was told by my tutor, or one of my tutors, he said, go look it up. And he said, this is what it deals with. Now look, and so when I searched for exactly what he told me to search for, that's when I found it. And the Unity people that I was communicating with in my email, I had to explain how Unity worked to that stupid kid in email who knew less than me. And I say stupid because of the type of grammar that was coming back in email. And no, they weren't overseas. It was childish grammar. Not broken English, childish grammar. And I had to explain it to them twice. I said, no, it appears that this is this, and it's only got 7 digits here, and this is this, so it's only got 7, you know. So I thought I had 10 digits. No, it's only 7. So when I was using 10 digits, it was breaking up. So Unity would actually try to present me with an answer, even though it was not allowed to. So I actually got 11 digits worth of answers instead of 7, because I put in 10 digits to use with Modulo. And I don't want to hear anybody telling me, no, that's not possible. That's exactly what was going on. That's why I couldn't figure out what the fuck was going on to begin with. And that's the story of how, if you are a newbie programmer and you're dealing with programmers when you're trying to learn something, and they say, go, or you have to look up the documentation, you need to learn the fundamentals. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. The vast majority of the documentation out there is, the vast majority is technically correct. But you have a bunch of documentation on top of that that's either outdated, so it was technically correct when it was written, especially with Unity, documentation that's 6 years old. I found documentation that's 6 years old. I found documentation that claims that Unity is supposed to do X when it actually has been doing Y for the last 4 years. I found documentation in Unity, especially with screen width and height versus viewport width and height. They're actually flipped. I believe it's viewport width. They're actually flipped in their meaning. So it's wholly wrong. And then there's stuff that's missing, bugs that aren't recognized because Unity's not updating them, and stuff that's wholly wrong because the documentation is flipped. And when I go to report it, sometimes I've actually gotten a bunch of shit. I've even had to lecture. I lectured one stupid programmer who works at Unity on the English language because there was a sentence that was a double negative in a way where it could not be misconstrued to be a positive. And even after I dumped the rules of English grammar in, he said, we all understand, you just have to get used to it. Which brings me to my original point of, if programmers were treated the way they treat others when they try to do something that isn't coding, they would realize how they're actually treating other people. And just as with any language out there, computer programming is about seeing the grammar in action, hearing it in action. So when someone asks, well, how do you do that? You don't need to write the code for them. You could show them a test code and say, well, you're trying to do something similar to this, right? Let's say that you're actually feeling like somebody's taking advantage of you, right? And just show them how it would be done. You don't have to show it with their project. You could show it with them, in general. Or you could walk them through it and have them write it. And then you could say, okay, well, that's good, except maybe move this over here. That's how you learned English. That's the only way that I can learn C# and programming. It's the only way I can learn language. It's the only way anybody can learn language. You don't have somebody like me saying, go read a dictionary. If someone asks them, how do you use this word? Go read a dictionary. No. You might say, okay, well, this word means this, this, and this. The dictionary says this. That's how you refer to documentation, and that's also how you show it in action. In fact, the pillars for teaching English are this: demonstrate in action. And that includes audio and written. Explain in your own words what it means. Explain, and then back it up with a dictionary. And same thing with the vocabulary. And let me be very clear here. It takes people about, think about when you first learned how to read and write. Think about how long it took you to get up to a high school reading level. Okay, let's say you're a late reader. First grade, maybe second. That's for very late readers. It's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 8 to 10 years for you to get up to a high school reading level. And that's not even at the level where I am. I'm at a level where when I see a linguist talk about to boldly go is really a split infinitive, and you can't use that in the English language. And I say to them, actually, it's not a split infinitive because the verb is in the middle of the sentence rather than the end. So the primary verb form takes precedence. Therefore, you can flip the descriptive, the word boldly, and the verb if it's mid-sentence, providing that the rest of the sentence proceeds with normal grammatical structure. That's the level where I am, where I lecture people who are idiots at Oxford. And at my level, I can absolutely call Oxford people idiots. But, you know, if a programmer comes to me and I say, I'm going to teach you English, I'm not going to blast them because they don't get full English comprehension in one friggin' year. And yes, that does mean repetition, and that does mean sometimes, I mean, I know people are going to ask the same question several times. Several times over. They are going to ask the same question. Only they think it's the different question because they believe that things have actually changed. Like, well, what about this situation where I do this, where I do this, where I do this? Don't worry. This is similar to this. This is similar to this. This is similar to this. The rules still apply. And, you know, English is a language that's absolutely fascinating because of how complex it is. And yet, as complex as it is, the rules are very, very simple. But people get lost into it, lost into the concept because they can't see the forest for the trees. And that I'm struggling with that, with programming. Because even though I know that I may be asking the same question over and over and over, I'm not entirely sure, and I may be asking a different question. Because sometimes it has turned out where I think, oh, well, this is just like this, and my tutor says, no, they're totally different topics here. And in English, we have a similar thing, like, you know, I before ye except after C, you know, that little rhyme. Some people have tried to prove that doesn't work. Some head up the ass linguists have tried to prove that doesn't work, except every time they try to prove that doesn't work, it's when they're using foreign words introduced into the English language. Foreign words do not abide by English rules and grammar in terms of pronunciation. They never have and they never will. So when someone says, oh, this is the same thing, like fruta is this, for instance, the word fruta is going to be pronounced the same way as or the, oh God, what was it? Oh, I can't remember a place name, a Spanish place name. Imagine there's a Spanish place name that has ITA at the end. Oh, well, I guess that means I have to pronounce it fruita. Well, no, actually, because one is a Spanish word, ITA, is ita, you know, or whatever, with that particular Spanish word and that pronunciation. Fruta is actually a white man's word, and they tried to conjugate it as if it were a Spanish word because they thought that they were speaking Spanish, but in reality, it's just fruit with an A at the end. So those are, you know, a person would look at both of them and they would say, oh, it's the same. I'm having the same issue in programming. The same exact issue in programming. As do many new programmers. And computer programmers out there who are asked these questions, they need to understand. You probably have several years of experience on top of this person who's barely learning. And there's no basics or this, and this that will teach you everything. That's a load of bullshit. It's a cop-out used by programmers who aren't smart enough to know there's no real such thing as basics cover everything. There's no rule and basics that will prevent you from making those mistakes. Like, what would you say, you know, if I presented you with the word fruta and Spanish word that ends in ITA, location name. Say there's a town called Juanita, right? And let's say it's Juanita, Colorado, Fruta, Colorado. But they're spelled Juanta, and it's spelled Fruita. Well, it's in if you go by basics, right? if you think that basics cover everything. And I said, no, you're an idiot. Go look up at basics. To somebody, let's say a total alien, space alien, comes down and says, oh, Colorado, okay, this must be a Spanish-speaking country or state or whatever it is in the United States, because it's a Spanish word, Colorado, actually 2 words. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pronounce it. Look at that. Juanita and Fruita. Or maybe somebody says, well, it's in an English-speaking country, so the basics tell me that I should default to English. So Colorado, oh, look at that. Juanita and Fruta is how I'm going to pronounce it. That's basics, all right? But no, if you got advanced English behind you and or advanced Spanish, you'll likely understand. But let me tell you something. As someone who worked in the travel industry, continues to work there periodically, a lot of people come from California, come into Colorado, and they say, how do you pronounce this? Is it Fruita? So they don't know, because they're not locals. They don't have that knowledge. They didn't grow up with that knowledge. So the concept of basics being universal is bullshit. If you grew up in the Grand Valley area, you would know, oh, that's fruta. Oh, and Juanita is a Spanish word, and fruta isn't. That's actually an advanced concept. But kids that are 4 years old, they would get it because they grew up with it. California, they think that they understand the basics, and they understand, oh, well, it has a TA, so I'm going to assume that's a Spanish word. And Juanita, that we know that's a Spanish word. Colorado, that's a state named after a Spanish word, 2 words. And then we come from California, which is also a Spanish word. Fruita must be the correct pronunciation because of the basics. No, it's not fucking true. So what's basic to different people is going to be different. That's just a fact. And if you're a programmer and you don't understand that, you're not going to be someone who can help somebody unless you have patience and you're willing to learn that. That's the big deal here. And there may be times where someone says, I am so lost, I need to understand this. Can you please help walk me through it? If you don't want to walk them through it, don't fucking say yes. If you say, okay, I'll walk you through it, be prepared to walk through every line of code. And I'm telling you right now, that's the only way for every person who learns programming is going to wind up with that question. Can you walk me through this? Something is wrong. I don't know what's wrong. I've been staring at it for months. That's called a roadblock. And if you have ever tried to learn English or any sort of language, I guarantee you, in your life, you've come into a roadblock. A lot of that probably happened to you if you were studying something like advanced English composition. Or maybe you just gave up and you didn't go beyond the roadblocks, and all you finished in college, if you went to college, was English Comp 102, English Comp 103. But when people start talking about advanced English and roadblocks, that's when people start saying, what's the metaphor in Shakespeare mean over here? Why did Tolstoy do this? Or maybe say you're into poetry. What's the real implication of this in Walt Whitman's poem? Was he just being an idiot, or did he actually mean something here? So, keep that in mind. And sometimes you can convey, just the idea that fundamentals resolve all questions is mentally incompetent and beyond stupid. Sometimes people need to be reminded, what exactly does this mean, or what exactly does this mean? Keep it simple, stupid. Sometimes people actually think they're keeping it simple. Sometimes I think when I do something that's 100 lines is keeping it simple. And also keep in mind that sometimes using a sledgehammer, there's a thing that I ran across where they said, you're overcomplicating the code. Make it really simple. Sometimes overcomplicating the code is useful because you're learning how to use complicated code further down the line. When someone teaches you English, if you've ever diagrammed a sentence, diagramming a sentence is the equivalent, the absolute equivalent of overcomplicating the code. And let me write it here. I'm preparing something for you, and I'm going to share it with you. Now, there are different ways to diagram a sentence. I have learned my own method of diagramming a sentence because it serves me in a number of ways, and I'm going to explain why and how. And that'll be the end of this particular video. Then I'm going to start programming. There's my Photoshop. There's my Photoshop. There we go. Let me just enlarge this Photoshop. Now, sometimes you need to overcomplicate something, especially if it's for someone new to a language or new to programming, because it's how they will learn. So I'm going to overcomplicate this sentence here. Apply the transformation. I'm going to use blue because I don't like red marking anything. Alright. As I said before, I use my own method of diagramming. A lot of people do these little things where they go down here and then they do this and then they do that. I'm sure you've seen that, and I'm sure that's the method you learned. That method is it's like an advanced editor method that's not actually really helpful, I've found, in a number of ways. So I basically, when I diagram a sentence, I break it into, let's find the objects, subjects, basically the nouns, the topics, essentially. Objects, subjects, topics can all be the same thing. You could have the object, which is the subject, and the topic of a sentence. Or you could have numerous. But let's go ahead and separate essentially what we might as well call nouns. All right. Oh, come on. All right. Oh. And then I'm going to further break this up into smaller little divisions. So I have 1, 2, 3 big divisions. Sorry, I sneezed. I managed to catch the mic before fully sneezing. Real honker of a sneeze. So what we're really seeing is a sentence broken down into three main parts. And of those three parts, we have subdivisions. So the first thing is to identify the main nouns, I guess. I like to call them the main nouns. So let me communicate like that rather than using any sort of advanced terminology here. The main nouns would be the dog, or dog, and fox. Oh yeah, there's also one extra section down here, the punctuation. Punctuation is its own beast. So, dog and fox. They are two objects, subjects, etc. in the sentence. They are a focal point. I'll just call them objects because we could, let's compare it to unity objects. Let's say that the dog and the fox are unity objects. Okay? Now, they are being identified as focal points. These focal point identifiers, the word the. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that the word, these the or whatever, like articles and are proper, like a proper title or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The can be replaced by a number of different things. But essentially it is an identifier that there is an object. And they say, look at here. Here is the object. If you remove the, then the word dog becomes a proper noun. In fact, the word the is now inherent in the properties of the noun. The British dropped the without realizing they shouldn't. So everything, according to the British, is suddenly a proper noun, which I'm going to restrain Professor Higgins. I have an alternate personality called Professor Higgins, where I start yelling at British misabuse of the English language. That's a joke. That's a joke there. So the identifies this as like a normal noun. Normal object, a normal unity object. So it's there. You remove the, and suddenly the unity object is proper. It's more proper, right? It's inherent. It is the. The magic of removing the word the is this adjective, lazy, suddenly becomes part of the name of the word fox. Lazy Fox is now his proper name. Now let's go ahead and correct the English. What is wrong with this English? Well, let me show you what's wrong with this English. If these are not proper nouns, then should they be capitalized? Absolutely not. Now I've suddenly taught you capitalization. Right? But for the sake of just keeping my little thing here, I'll just keep it proper. I'll continue like this. I've decided I'm going to continue like this. So let's say they are not their proper names. So they're not proper nouns. We need the word the, because the identifies what is and is not a proper noun, because a proper noun has different functions. I've only just learned about this concept with camel case, Pascal case, and the other case, and I say I just learned it, and yet I forget the terms. So yeah, there's something very similar to this in programming, including how you address them. So I don't know how you would want to comparison programming. You might decide to call them like global objects or not. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Now you know what the function of the is. The identifies the following object, the immediately following object. It's just a regular old object. Not a proper noun, not a proper whatever. It's just a regular old object. Right? So dog is a regular old object. It's not like the big kahuna. My poor mom, she's tired. It's really hot here. She's enjoying the TV show The Bear. Now, you have to put the adjective in for the object to describe what the object is. Lazy describes the function and the existence of the object. You know, I say function, but it's more about existence. Adjective is about existence, the type of existence. So in programming, lazy might actually be the real concept of private variable, public variable, static variable. That's what an adjective is. Now, obviously in English, we're declaring these variables in the middle of the actual sentence. You want to be doing that if you program, right? Actually, you know what? I think I saw somebody do it, but it was some messed up code. And I also heard that somebody was trying to create a programming language where it functions just like English. Good luck to them. Now, everything that happens, the dog is going to do something. So this is describing what the dog is doing. What immediately follows the dog is what he's doing. So this is what the dog is doing. The first is the action. The action is a verb. Jumped. Past tense. He jumped. The second is a location. X, Y, and Z. Where did he jump? Plus 10 on the Z-axis. He jumped over. And what is the origin point for the Z-axis? The lazy fox. So the fox is in a state of being inactive or deactivated. And we want to add emphasis to this, so you have the punctuation there. So I'm looking a little bit like John Madden in how I'm doing this. But essentially, when I diagram sentence structures, this is how I diagram them. It looks like, it doesn't look like your normal diagramming, but this is what helps me to understand what's going on. Now, since punctuation is usually reserved for literary emphasis, I mean, in technical writing, punctuation is very limited in how you can use it. Literary, you can use it however you want. I decide what is my emotion here with this sentence as opposed to this sentence that immediately follows it down here. So say I had a sentence down here. Or as opposed to the sentence up here. Say I had a sentence up here. To me, this is diagramming. I'm understanding the objects. They're declared as proper nouns. They're not proper nouns. They're common objects. I established a description for the object. How many, let's say my sentences are more complex. That helps me keep the descriptions down to just 1 or 2 words instead of having 50 different words to describe the object. Like, let's say, Tolstoy's grandson who writes like trash. There was a 50-word sentence in one of his books that I have, and it was all metaphor. And then he had, in The Coming of the King, he had 3.5 pages of metaphor describing an undersea volcano, I think is what it was. I diagrammed the hell out of the thing, and I realized that he was just, it was like he was on acid staring at a picture of something. And he tried to describe every little bit. And the metaphor on top of metaphor, on top of metaphor, on top of metaphor. And when you diagram metaphors, it gets way more complicated than this. But this is what you would call a simple, like I don't know. I would call it like a first grade sentence, because I was reading when I was in kindergarten. But this, usually people try and learn this type of sentence when they're in first grade. The dog had fun would be a simpler sentence. The dog was happy, right? This is a more advanced sentence, slightly more advanced sentence. But you see how much is going on here? Imagine if this were a programming language. So I'm up to, in terms of programming, what you might call a couple sentences, right? Like a little bit longer, maybe 14-word sentences. Now, obviously, keep it simple. Stupid is the main objective of programming, where in literary terms, you want to hit right in the middle. You want to be between keeping it really simple and keeping it from getting it too complex. And that helps with DLLs. But this is how, I teach. Sometimes when I coach people on English, this is how I might coach them, And if a person asks me, well, what if the fox ran through the gate? Okay. The fox ran through the gate. It's not an identical sentence structure because the gate has no description to it. Might seem a little different. But I would answer it in a similar fashion. I would say the fox, or the dog, say, ran through the, let's use an approved abbreviation of through, the gate. There we go. Dog ran through the gate, right? Fits, essentially it would fit in a similar, let me get rid of that other little thing here. There, I changed the diagramming. Oh. I changed the diagramming. So the diagramming actually changed. But because the programmer or the English student, programming student said, but it changes a part of the sentence, I would then say, yes, it changes a part of the sentence, but it was a minor part. See, the big things that are in the sentence are knowing the objects, what one object is doing with the other. Identifying both objects. And yeah, that's basically the whole function here. So for those of you programmers out there who want to, or who don't understand what I'm talking about, I've done my best to explain it. Programming students, people new to programming, they're just like you were, essentially, when you were 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years old, trying to figure out how to spell and write in the English language. You learned these things because teachers taught you these things. Now, maybe you forgot a lot of these things, but you still read and write. You don't have me coming to you and saying, you don't know your fundamentals. If I'm fixing your work from an English standpoint, this is what I do as an editor. I do it in my mind because I'm that far progressed as an editor. A lot of what you do when you program is probably in your mind because that's how far progressed you are as a programmer. But the reality is, a lot of these things, this amounts to me writing all of these comments in my stuff. Right here. These comments are essentially diagramming. Oh, come on, where is it? Photoshop, there we go. All of these comments in my code, that's essentially me diagramming the code and understanding where it is and how it works. When I debug log my stuff, I'm diagramming my code so I can understand how it works. So I wanted to make this a very thorough video. Some people may use it, or some people may need to see it to adjust their behavior. Maybe some people will see it to really understand. Maybe some people need to see it to or to just be happy that they know that they're not causing the problem. I don't care. But I hope that this makes the programming rounds. And to any editors out there who have a problem with how I diagram a sentence, GFY. I diagram my sentences in a way where I'm trying to convey on Photoshop how I diagram it in my mind. All right, very rarely do I actually go through and diagram it, but I use my fingers and everything. I know that editors for papers, they have a special editing language, like copy editors. They have to know what little squiggles to write and where. Those little squiggles are dying out. Those little squiggles were there for an aspect of printing. It was like shorthand for printers. It was created for printers and printing houses. It's not an actual real way to diagram or real way to edit. It's just been kept around and kept alive without people remembering how it was created. The way that I diagram it is solely for the purpose of making changes where I'm able to communicate with them. A lot of authors don't follow those copywriting hieroglyphs. In fact, you know what? I've known so many copy editors that don't even know how to use the right hieroglyph, that they wind up just scribbling on the paper. In my opinion, it's caused more problems in the digital age than it's solved. It's an incompetent way of editing, except by those who are so experienced in it, they use it in their sleep. So that's my little rant in the English world. Anyway, but basically you get the idea of diagramming. And everybody has their own way of understanding how to break things apart. So I hope this video reaches out to those who need it. And I'm going to stop this stream, and then I'm going to restart everything. So have a good day.